joined by Doris Kearns Goodwin today here in the Ohio Statehouse in the Statehouse Museum. And it's a pleasure to be in this particular place having this conversation, talking about something we both love very much is history and the study of history. So thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm delighted to be with you today. Absolutely. In this very place.
It's a very historic place to have a conversation about our past. And many of us come to this field. I work in history because there's something specific that sparked us, like a teacher or a field trip. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came to love history.
I think it's probably a series of things. I mean, first was my father taught me that mysterious art of keeping score while listening to Brooklyn Dodger games. So when he was at work during the day, I could record the history of that afternoon's game. And he'd come home at night, and I could, with all my miniaturized symbols, recount every play of every inning. And it made me feel so special to keep his attention. He never told me then that all of this was actually described in great detail in the sports pages of the newspapers the next day. So I thought without me, he wouldn't even know what happened to the Brooklyn Dodgers. So that was the beginning of history, I think. But then I had a teacher, as you say. I think there's often so much a mentor or a teacher. And she taught history when I was in high school. She won an award as one of the best history teachers in all of New York State. And she taught us in a way that she made us feel she knew the people she was teaching us about. She had such details of their lives that you felt she was presenting a whole person to you. And I remember it came to a complete pinnacle when she talked about Lincoln dying. She actually cried. And we all thought, oh, my God, this teacher's crying. She must have known him. So that was pretty special.
I don't know if you ever saw when they were doing the 150th of Lincoln's death, and they marched from, there was interpreters that marched from Ford's Theater over to the house. And I remember watching that. I thought it was so emotional. It's sometimes the best stuff of history.
Yeah, no, you really do feel like you're catapulted back into that time. And if you care about the person, it's just a wonderful thing, the study of history. I'm so glad. It makes you feel like, and I'm sure you do too, that you're living in different layers of time. Not only now, but you know the time that came before, you know our ancestors, you know the Civil War, you know the Depression, and you feel like you've got a depth that you wouldn't have if you didn't study history.
That's right. So how did you come to focus on presidential history specifically?
It could have been another form of history. In fact, in graduate school, my PhD thesis was in the Supreme Court, so I might have been studying those characters in their robes. But it all had to do with the fact that when I was there in my second year of graduate school, I became a White House fellow. I was selected for this program, and that meant that I got to work with Lyndon Johnson in the White House and then accompany him to his ranch to help him on his memoirs. And it was such an extraordinary experience. I mean, he talked and talked and talked. He never stopped talking. And he spent hours. I luckily was working on the memoirs on two chapters that mattered to him. One was civil rights and the other was Congress. So it made him happy. So he wanted to talk to me. He talked as we swam in the pool. He talked as we went to the movie theater on his place. And he told me stories. And those stories then became the foundation of the book that I wrote, the first one on Lyndon Johnson and the American Dream. And then I loved it so much working on it that I thought, well, I'll try some other presidents. So suddenly years go by and there's Abraham Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt and the Kennedys. And suddenly you're a presidential historian. It's one of those things, when you're doing it, you don't realize this is what I'm becoming. But it's been a wonderful career. I just feel like I've been able to learn so much about the eras and about these leaders and what made them great leaders. And the only fear has always been that there'll be a panel of all of them in the afterlife. And each one's going to tell me everything I missed about them. And Johnson will be the first person to scream, how come that book on the Roosevelts was twice as long as the book you wrote about me? But other than that, it's been a wonderful thing to do.
I imagine you hear Johnson's voice a lot.
It's incredible.
Such a big voice.
And especially now that they have these tape recordings of his voice, that you can literally hear him all the time. And it's not just in a speech. It's hearing him, in a conversation on the telephone. So I do feel that he's around me very much.
So this question is probably the most basic question that any of us history people get, but we get it a lot. And I think we're happy to answer it. I think we probably ask people in job interviews this question a lot. But why do you think history matters?
I mean, I think it matters so much because it's the only thing that can give us perspective on where we've come from, helping us to know where we're going to go. It gives us lessons. I mean, we learn from our parents and our grandparents. So, of course, we can learn from people who lived before us by reading about them. I think also it allows us to imagine other people's ways of life. That's what's so great about literature and history. It really can stoke the empathy toward peoples that are different from us, a time that's different from us. We see them struggling with democracy the same way we are. And I think it makes you a deeper human being. Now, one of the things Teddy Roosevelt said is that to be a good leader, the most important thing is to understand human nature. And the best way you do that is through history and literature, I think. Of course, that's a little bit subjective, but I think it helps you greatly. And Emily Dickinson once said, there's no frigate like a book to take us lands away. So you read history, and you're learning about other times in our civilization, in our democracy, and you see people evolving and the country evolving. And Lincoln said at a certain point, he was worried when the revolutionary generation was dying off, and it was a very tumultuous time. It was in the 1830s when there were abolitionists being killed and lynchings being done in the South. And he was afraid that when the revolutionary people died, we were forgetting the ideals of the revolution. So he was really recommending that mothers had to read children history, that pastors had to talk about it on the pulpits, and that we had to teach it in the schools, the history of the revolution, so those ideals would remain strong in our country's mind and heart.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. So in your book, The Leadership Journey, How 4 Kids Became President, I really appreciate how there's a piece in here about the language in the book, that, that we're talking very plainly about things that have changed over time and what it means to look at multiple perspectives through history.
Right. I mean, I think what you do is you see how the people thought about issues that we're still grappling with today. And it's important not to judge them from the present back onto the past, because they had a certain way of thinking, and some of them were ahead of their times, others might be behind their times. But you should look at them with empathy and try and understand where they're coming from, and then look at ourselves and see how far somebody might look at us 200 years from now and say, what in the world were they doing then?
Yeah, and hopefully if we can have empathy for the past, that lesson for now, right?
Exactly so.
Be together is, I think, a really important lesson. So you have spent a lot of time in library and archives, poring over papers and artifacts. And so how have you come to value those institutions that are holding on to the material?
It is so important. I mean, not just for our sake, we historians who love it. I mean, when I go into those places, I feel like that's the treasure, to be able to actually hold for a few moments a primary source. You see a memo that was important in some great decision that was made, or most importantly, you've got letters that people wrote to one another. There's nothing like looking over the shoulder of the person writing the letter, a handwritten letter. You see diaries that were kept. You see journals. And if the institutions are not there to preserve these things, then the people later on will never know what they were. They'll just be gone somewhere. And I think for young people especially, if you see a primary source, and it's just a boring word, primary source, what it really means is somebody actually wrote that letter, and you're able to hold that letter, and you can imagine them putting the pen to ink, and then you can feel the emotion that's in the letter, then you really are connected to the past. I mean, that's why history connects, like history connection, as you call it. You're connecting to other people, and you're learning about their dreams and their sorrows and their triumphs and their tragedies, and it's an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us have had the experience of holding or seeing something real and just feeling so deeply connected to it and getting emotional, about it. And I certainly, in reading your most recent book, The Unfinished Love Story, I was really struck by the archival material that your husband held. And I'm curious where it all went. I can ask you more about that later. But how was that? How did you find that different, and, sort of turning your spotlight to both of your story, really?
Well, my husband really had collected so much, those 300 boxes over such a period of time, that it was like a mini archive that I'm used to. It had letters and diaries and newspaper clippings and magazines, and it had drafts of speeches and menus and memorabilia. It was just incredible what he kept. I don't know how he did it for all that period of time, but there would be moments in it when I was able to hold something. For example, there's a telegram, the blue telegram, an actual telegram from Martin Luther King after one of the speeches my husband had worked on with Lyndon Johnson at Howard University. And he says in it, never before has a president spoken so profoundly and so eloquently about the problems of racial justice. And you just think, oh my God, this is such an important moment, and I'm there. Or there's memos that Dick had sent to JFK because he worked for JFK. He worked for Bobby Kennedy. He was with Robert Kennedy when he died. And you feel that whole decade come to life through this material. I don't know what it's going to be like a couple hundred years from now. And you know this now, making digital collections. But there's nothing like the paper that was used in this period of time. And there's so much of it. So that, sometimes my husband would tease that all of that could have been contained in a cell phone someday. That he had to carry around when he was working for JFK in the campaign. He carried around something called the Nixopedia, which was this huge suitcase of every statement that Nixon had made so they could counter it in a debate. And then he would sometimes say, I could have had that all on this cell phone now if it was today. But it wouldn't be the same. There's something about having the additional early newspaper clippings or the early letters that were actually written.
Yeah, the immediacy that you were holding the same thing that they were holding.
Exactly right.
It's very magical. And doing archival research, there's that delight of discovery. And I try to explain to people sometimes that this is just hard and not everything is on Google, which I think people don't understand. I can't say that enough. But I'm wondering if there's something that comes to mind. You mentioned the telegram, but other things that you found amongst those boxes that maybe surprised you.
Now, I think that the train of discoveries that had to do with Dick's days in Harvard Law School had some surprises in it. What happened is I found these letters that he had written to his best friend, 50 of them. So the best friend had saved them and gave them back to him before the best friend died. And I'd always wanted to know what Dick was like as a young man. He was 12 years older than me. And I kept saying to him, would I have fallen in love with you? Then I find these letters and I realized I really would have. And he was kind of arrogant, but he was always funny. And he just had a freshness, which the way he wrote. So I found this one letter in which he said, he'd already become first in his class, and he was the editor of the Law Review. And he writes to his friends saying, they're flying me all over the country for any law firm I want. It's a burden of choice. What am I going to do? I could take a scholarship. I could clerk for Justice Frankfurter. And I was thinking, God, you're pretty arrogant at that moment. And then right after that, I found the picture of the Law Review. There's 60 guys and 2 women. Dick's holding the baton, and one of the women is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I saw her picture, and then I came running into Dick, and I said, she couldn't even get an interview at a law firm. She's in that same law review with all of you because she was a woman. And so, but then I found another note that he had written to her when she came back after her first year, and she was going to be late because she had a baby. And he said to her, don't worry about it. Her husband's name was Ginsburg, and he was a lawyer. He said, I know there's going to be a firm of Ginsburg, 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 and the little kid is now reading briefs instead of Mother Goose. Of course, you're all right. And then I thought, okay, you're okay, my husband-to-be.
Yeah, you're like, it still tracks.
Yeah, exactly. I still will fall in love with you.
One of the things I appreciate about your writing is how you paint a picture about place. That I feel like I can really see, the airplanes they're riding on, and the hotel rooms where there's, like a whole setup. And everything from the White House. And so, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about how place has shaped your work. We're here at the State House where, Lincoln discovered that, he had indeed won the election. So just wondered if you could talk about that a little.
Oh, you mean even when I was working on the book on Lincoln, to come here and know that it was being built in the 1850s when Salmon Chase, one of the other major rivals to Lincoln, who was in his cabinet, and to imagine the building going up, and then to see, as you say, that governor's office where he found out that the Electoral College had agreed that he was president. And just to see these hallways and to know what went on here. You can imagine a law was passed or a debate took place or there was a big problem here. I remember when I was a little girl, my parents took me to Hyde Park. I was actually, I think, in the 3rd grade, and I had to write an essay about Roosevelt, about Eleanor and Franklin. And I went into his office there, and there was a cigarette holder, and then his glasses were on the desk. And I said to the tour guide, I said, he must still be here. He's left them here. He felt so immediate. And then we went up to the bedroom, and there was the leash for Fala, the dog. Yeah. And I thought someday he's going to scamper in at any moment. You do feel the presence when you're in these actual buildings where the people walked and lived. I would love to someday just have kids be able to take a tour, even not just of the museums, but also of the homes where the leaders came from, because then you can imagine their daily lives. And I think the place is extraordinarily important, because that's how they become not figures on Mount Rushmore. they were in these homes before they became leaders even, or they lived there when they got older and they went there for rest and relaxation. And you can picture then that you might have known them if you walked around at that same time.
Yeah, and some of them are kind of modest.
Yeah, that's what you find. Even with Franklin having very big homes, that the little place at Warm Springs is so incredibly modest. He had to walk through some other bedroom to get to the bathroom even. And you think they can live in both kind of palaces and this at the same time.
So as the state history organization, the Ohio History Connection, we have the role in preserving places in addition to artifacts and stories and archives. And so how do you see that role of a place like us? What would be your pep talk for us to kind of, keep going and move into the future?
Well, I think it's so important, especially at a time now where history feels like it's being taught less in schools and that people are complaining that it's boring. It's never boring. The reason you know facts and figures is because they're part of the life history of somebody. Tell me about the places you have.
So we have 57 sites, and they range from 2,000-year-old earthworks that have just joined the UNESCO World Heritage List. Places like the home in Marion of Warren Harding, and the final resting place for William Henry Harrison. So we like to claim 8 presidents.
Oh, I know. You're the mother of all presidents.
Yes. I can have a fight with Virginia about presidents and North Carolina about flight. And then we also have places like the Armstrong Air and Space Museum and John Glenn's boyhood home, Ulysses S. Grant's birthplace where he could see slavery right across the Ohio River. So we're really, we have an abundance of historic places that we're stewarding. And trying to do it forever.
Right, right. It has to be there forever because there'll be people coming hundreds of years afterwards, and these moments still matter. That there will be more moments, but these were historic moments and historic places. That sounds great.
Well, thank you for making history not boring. There's a lot of bad history out there, so thank you for inspiring many of us and keeping the fires burning.
I think it all has to do with telling a story. Stories are hardwired in our brains. Somebody said to Abraham Lincoln, "Why do you tell so many stories?" And that didn't mean anecdotes. He told truths. Whenever he gave a speech, he'd say, "This is where we've come from on this issue. Here's where we are now, and here's where we need to go." And he said, because people remember stories better than facts and figures. Stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. So I think if you tell history as stories, and each one of those places that you're talking about has a story, each one of the archival boxes that comes out from your major place has stories to it. So if you tell them as stories, people will respond to them because then they can tell it to somebody else. Oh, I learned this story about Ulysses S. Grant today. That's a great moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad we could do this.
Yeah.